Hey, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening, Ann.
Good to see everyone made it tonight. We are here for our 104th episode of Line Upon Line. Tonight we're going to be talking about the third commandment. And Dr. Ricks, if you'd take us out, that would be wonderful.
Okay. Two elderly women are sitting together in the front pew of the church, listening to a fiery preacher. When this preacher condemned the sin of stealing, the two ladies cried out at the top of their voice, "Amen, brother! Go on, brother! Right on!" When the preacher condemned the sin of lust, they yelled, "Preach it! Preach it, brother! Preach it!" And when the preacher condemned the sin of lying, they jumped to their feet and screamed, "Right on, brother! We like it! Right on! Tell it like it is! Amen!" When the gossip, the two of them gasped. One turned to the other and said, "He's quit preaching. Now he's gone to meddling."
Another great start.
I put that in there because since the topic is the third commandment, it's just kind of like it's sort of words used in church that kind of got out of a little bit, maybe out of control. One more funny story, a little different. A mangy-looking guy goes to a bar. I mean, he's got beard and dirt in his beard. It looks really mangy-looking. The bartender says, "What would you like to drink?" He says, "Well," the bartender says, "I wonder if you can pay for it." He says, "Well, no, I can't pay for it, but I'll show you something really interesting if you drink. Well, it can be risque, but if you have something really exciting, I'll give you a free drink." "So deal," says the guy. He reaches into his big pocket and he pulls out a hamster. The hamster runs down the bar, runs across the bar room, jumps on the piano, and his little feet and body bouncing back and forth, he plays wonderful Gershwin songs. And the hamster's really good. It's wonderful music. And the bartender says, "You're right." He gives the guy a drink. He's sucking down his drink. And he wants another drink. The bartender says, no. Gotta be another miracle performance, get another drink. The guy says, "Okay." He reaches his pocket. He pulls out a frog. The frog, you know how frogs croak their mouth. Every time he does that, a wonderful music comes out of the frog's mouth. He is really singing wonderfully to the Gershwin playing of the hamster. The guy runs over. He says, "That is wonderful. I'll give you $300 for a singing frog." He takes his money and runs out. The bartender says to the guy, "You know, you're really stupid. Think about it. A frog that can sing that well, he's worth more than $300. Not so," says the guy. "That talented hamster over there, he's also a very good ventriloquist."
Show us how that frog croaks his cheeks one more time.
Oh, my.
Well, you know, we got to do something crazy here.
That's funnier than the joke.
Well, big cheeks have got to be good for something, or elastic cheek, or whatever it is. One thing that probably has gone unnoticed by the world, there's been a several billion dollar run on Greek banks. There's a run on the banks. You might remember the famous words of FDR during the Great Depression when there were runs on American banks and they had to close them so they wouldn't have runs on them. And he said, "The only thing we must fear is fear itself." I can't really sound like FDR, but in his aristocratic way. But that is happening in Greece. Their socialist government is sending signals to the voters that their money might get confiscated because Greece can't, or at least they're unwilling to do the austerity to pay the debt they owe the rest of Europe. And it's a pot. You realize nobody knows what's going to happen. Even the financial guy who talked about it, he says the media isn't talking about the fact there's a run on Greek banks. If this keeps up, the whole Greek financial banking system could collapse. And he's now this is one man's opinion. He says what the Europeans ought to do, because Greece keeps refusing to pay the bill, they keep stalling on making an austerity plan. They ought to just kick them out of the euro and end their problems before they get worse. What do you all think?
Well, there's some other headlines that have been since you've probably seen that come up. I haven't read through it yet, but now they're saying Russia may come to their rescue. What if Russia bails them out? I can't see why, but I mean they'd get their support for just about anything they wanted. Also, they talking about locking down. The reason they're running the banks is because they're talking about locking the banks down so they can't get their money out. It may take all the people's money. Just take it.
I heard Germany. People, there are even some people in America who worry about, the reason they're prosecuting the guy who was the former Speaker of the House a couple speakers back, because he took too much money out of the bank in too short a time period. But it was his money. People say, wait a minute, if the government is restricting us from getting our own money, that kind of has some Americans worried.
I've got two things. I heard that they asked Germany for a bailout. Germany said they'd give them a bailout, but they would have to become a German state, so they weren't happy with that. And the other thing is, in America, if everybody went to the bank and asked for their money, they can't give it to them. They have to write you a check.
Yeah. Well, that's all money is anyway, is a check. It's a promise to give you more checks. I mean, it's basically nothing. But yeah, you're right. You couldn't get cash out.
By the one of the changes they made, and I don't remember all the dates in the banking law, and I don't think it was all that long ago. Banks have always held real estate, but they can now consider it an asset. A lot of banks hold houses they can't sell or hard to sell, and they're worth, a couple $100,000. Well, you can have a whole bunch of homes, and on assets, the bank's got its $100 million of assets, but a lot of it's not liquid.
Right, and then they borrow money based on that, like 10-to-1 as well, then loan it out.
I had someone tell me that the banks are practicing how to do lockdowns and ways to get away in case everybody went to the bank and demanded their money. They can't give it to them. A lot of people don't realize that they cannot hand you cash. It's just not there. And what would happen if you went to the bank and said, "Listen, I've got $1,000." Well, no, we don't have any money. You don't have $1,000? No, I don't have any money. It's all gone. What's going to happen? If how that would play out in an actual bank.
By the way, let me give listen to this same financial advisor. I think is very smart. By the way, if people ask for a definition of money in the economy, at least one definition is confidence. That is, the money represents a certain amount of economic resources and power, but you have to believe in it, have confidence in the currency, and that it represents what it's supposed to represent. And that confidence is, it's a second. Like in Greece, the fact that they're having a run on the bank means that people no longer trust that their government is financially, the money represents what it's supposed to, and they feel that their money is going to become misused or abused or something. And like I said, I think our economy will do all right as long as people have reasonable confidence. Also, China has started, with a few of their smaller trading partners in the Far East, like Singapore, and a few others in that part of the world, but they're small. They've been, the American dollar is the reserve currency of the world, and it has been for many, many years, and it still is. China can't get off the dollar's reserve currency. It's just too big, and there's just too much to it. But they're slowly weaning themselves by getting some of their smaller Eastern Asian partners. They're just trading only in the Chinese currency. As I say, America still is in a good position because in this world, who else can you trust?
Yeah.
It's sad
but
because our economy is not in very good shape, and our money is. I mean, we're way overextended as far as borrowing money, but ours is. The rest of the world is so bad. Ours still looks good. That's the sad part because ours is almost useless, but everybody else is so much worse. They still turn to us.
and the countries like Switzerland, which they have great credit and they control everything pretty tightly, but they're not big enough, to be the world's reserve currency. So,
Right.
And while I think everybody throws the doom and gloom out there, and no one can predict when people are going to lose confidence in the banks and the economy, but I do think America's past performance and our size, and the fact that Europe's got the euro problem with the poor cheating countries in Europe, China has got some kind of problem. The Chinese stock market has been down, their economy has dropped back, and a lot of investors don't trust the Chinese. So they're not going to go. Japan has some kind of banking crisis, which I don't understand. So when you look at it that way, where else are you going to go? America is still the pivot point for global trade and global currency.
Yeah, we kind of made sure of that. We kind of deep sixed Russia's economy earlier in the last 8 to 12 months with the price of oil and us and the Saudis. But yeah, we're as bad as we are, bad a shape we're in. We're still the best game in town.
Now, the downside of that is, if America's economy ever collapsed, we would drag probably the entire world down to a worldwide depression. And I mean, I'm just speculating theoretically. The world could then blame America for the worldwide depression. You see how that could work?
Oh yeah.
George Washington said that we should never do business or trade with any other nation. We should do it all within our borders. He's got to be turning over in his grave. You take a look. Go ahead.
America is still under the blessing of God. That was a promise, and that's quite a nice cushion to have.
Yeah. And also, we still have some advantages. A lot of business and world trade still done in English. We still have a lot of natural resources, even if we're not using them all yet.
Have you seen the front cover of 21st Century Watch that just came out? When you get that, read all the signs. The blessings of God are not going to stay in this country unless we change some things. It's a picture of people protesting or whatever, and they all have signs. Read all the signs. You'll be absolutely sickened with what some of these people put on their cardboard and their whatever it is. I mean, gay rights flags and everything God's not to do.
And now the Pope, none other than the Pope, has endorsed global warming. It's as if that he doesn't have a Bible.
And that's not going to help our economy, by the way. And the problem is, some of these countries, for politics reasons, they'll say anything. Oh yeah, we're for global warming because it's good politics, but they won't do all that crazy stuff to hurt their economy that much. But if our government were to sign some of these treaties, we'd probably try to do it and screw up our economy.
Yeah, the Pope came from South America, and there's a lot of communism in those countries down there. And one of the things that communism has adopted, and they kind of, they've perverted Jesus's message, and they've kind of adopted the help the poor, right? And they've perverted that message, and he came from that environment where that was taught. Well, that the whole thing about Jesus's message was help the poor. And they adopted that to get people on their side, the Christians to come, kind of, I don't know what the word is, but kind of opt them into their program. And he's from that environment. He's from that background. So all this socialist ideas you hear him put forth are coming from being in that environment and being exposed to communist regimes all through South America. They, I can't think of the name, not hijacked, but they have opted or co-opted parts of Jesus's message and twisted them to sound like we should just pour everything we have into poor people and not allow them to stand on their own or help them or teach them. The whole teach a man to fish instead of just giving him a fish. They don't want to hear that. They want to use that to gain power and influence in their countries. And he came, like I said, he came from that.
I've got a friend that's got a 26-year-old son that is able-bodied. He just lives at home and does nothing. His father invents jobs for him. Hey, make a flyer for me for my business, and I'll give you $300, $500. Put a little video up on YouTube, and I'll give you $500. He invents work for this kid. The kid is useless, absolutely useless. And he's talking to me. He says, "What do you think I should do?" I said, "He's 26 years old. He's 6'2". Has a high school diploma. There's a front door. You want to help him. Sometimes you kick him out of the nest and make him fly." And he's enabling this kid. His first car was a Mercedes that he totaled.
Oh, wow.
They have money. And I said, "You want to help him. Sometimes you're rough on him. He understands being rough on him physically, like working out, but you got to be rough on him emotionally as well. And sometimes, I don't know if anybody heard the speech that Donald Trump gave, and I don't know what he meant. This is just my take on it. But he said, I'm gonna help people get to work. Well, one way to do that is to cut out social programs. You're gonna find a way to eat. And create jobs by doing some things or whatever. But if I created 1 million jobs, but nobody get off their tail, and that's what happens in these communist or whatever you want to call them countries. They've created a way to keep people from becoming productive.
You know what? There's something else that nobody's talking about this. Yes, he gave that message where he's global warming is something has to be addressed. But he also chastised the environmentalists for then saying abortion, that how they accept abortion, and you cannot claim to be a environmentalist and care about the planet and care about people if you also promote abortion. You ain't seeing that part of his message in anything, because the liberals don't want to talk about that.
No, that's good to hear. I hadn't heard that.
I had not.
Oh yeah, he said that. He's being everything to all people. He's getting a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But it's funny how the liberals co-opt everything that they like from him, and they don't talk about the stuff that they don't like the abortion. You haven't seen that on the 6 o'clock news that he said that. You may have heard about him promoting environmentalism and global warming, but you won't hear him talk what he said about abortion either.
I saw a clip of Glenn Beck and his team, and they watched a abortion on some kind of I don't know if it was a website or what, and he was so disturbed. The look on his face was so disturbed, and he said, "This is Joseph Mengele." He goes, "How would you expect God to bless us when we do this too? How does this doctor go home at night and sleep?" And our nation has accepted the most horrible things. Why would God bless us?
Yeah. By the way, speaking of poverty, a lot of people know this. When I was a kid, they when we didn't eat our food, they said, "Don't you realize there are millions of Chinese who are starving to death, and you're not eating all your greens?"
Yeah, that's what happened to me.
I got one more question here that I want to.
I was doing my part.
I'm sure that you've all seen the news clips of this young man that shot up the church in South Carolina. Does anybody saw what I see in his eyes? When I look in his eyes, I see Charles Manson. or somebody like
He
that.
was on those psychotropic drugs that he was on. I forget what the name of them, but he was on them, I guess. Almost all these guys are.
Well,
I,
I've
Might have been mentally.
thought that Charles Manson and the absolute atrocities that he committed, I believe that he was demonized.
I think so too. And they one article on the internet said psychotropic drugs and he hated Christians. And he hated
Yep.
blacks, so it was a twofer for him. And he hated Jews as well.
Well, here's something. First off, if you look at him and you don't see it, okay, I'm thinking about the other side of things here. You have a son who drops out of school, can't make it. He's got an arrest record. He does drugs. He's on psychotropic drugs. And you think a good idea is to give him, he's been arrested a couple of times. You think a good idea is to give him a 45. This is going to end well, right? I mean, the father now, I believe he's going to be guilty of something after the fact.
If that's the case, if he really did give him that, I got a real problem trusting anything comes out of the media. I'm a little, and I don't know. If it happened, yeah, he's got issues. Plus, his kid's middle name, or is it his middle name? It's Storm. Storm. Yeah.
What a great dad. Name your kid Storm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
there may be more to this. There may be more to this story too. So
my wife says she thinks they're going to feel sorry for him. They're going to say, "Oh, he had a poor childhood, and his life was cruel, and he's mentally off bounds, and we should feel sorry for him." And I feel sorry for every disturbed person, but I still think he should get the death penalty anyway.
Oh yeah. This should be over in a few weeks, but it won't be. It'll drag on for decades.
In Dave's world, you do that, and we know you did it. We have video, picture, whatever, and then you confess. We don't need a trial or anything, We have a sheriff in a nearby county, and he makes comments on the news. You guys may have seen him. He says, if you get a sight picture of one of my deputies, you're never going to see a lawyer. I mean, he says, we will kill you. They asked him why his deputy shot a man 69 times, and he said, they ran out of ammo.
That's terrible.
And he ran out of ammo. Oh, he better not let that get to CNN.
They're all over it. All over it. Yeah, I went to see a speech he gave, and he doesn't pull any punches. He said, there's one of my deputies down here. Some of you may know him. He said last year he was looking for a burglary suspect, and he found him. He was shot 4 times. He's here with us today. The burglary suspect is not.
By the way, I'd like to ask everybody to think about this question, and then we can talk about it next week if it seems appropriate, after we have a chance to see how America responds. This church shooting could either drive we're going to always have nuts and fringes, all right? Let's conclude that's for real. It will either drive most Americans into more racial unity, or it'll drive us to more racial divide. And that depends on how the media handles it, of course. I'd like everybody to think about that. And the next week, we'll look and see how the media handles it and which way we go, more unity or more division.
That's fair enough. Yeah.
I'm on board.
Yep.
This kid made some comments
next week, but we'll have some thoughts by next week, probably.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I was thinking about the third commandment. It's all about reverencing God and by reverencing His name, because He's the ultimate authority. By the way, do you know that there are some Jews that were so concerned about breaking this commandment? They had a word kahashim, which just means the name, and they would never actually pronounce God's actual name. And in writing, they would often just have G blank or Hashim. They wouldn't even, some of them wouldn't even write it. That the tetragrammaton, the 4 pronouns, that's all that you find in the Hebrew. And the vowels, of course, were understood by the people who used the language, but because the Jews for so many centuries stopped pronouncing it, there's no certainty on how the vowels work. So it's either Yahweh, Jehovah. Those are the 3 most popular but there's a whole bunch of other possible combinations, and it's been anglicized to Jehovah. I mean, that's the anglicized version of 1500 of that word, Jehovah. And I tell people who worry about that, I say, look, God can speak English. So God knows who. And by the way, in the New Testament, they translated the Hebrew names of God into Greek names that mean the Almighty God. So apparently God does not mind his name being switched from one language to the other. So I said consonants. I said pronouns, and I meant consonants. I'm sorry, but I meant consonants, and I said, and it's the verbs that are in between the consonants.
Vowels.
That are vowels that are in between the consonants. Vowels.
It's been a long day. It's been a long week for me, too.
I should put all this down. It's in the other room somewhere. It's the, we got a louder.
Wireless color.
They gave me a brand new phone, and it does a whole lot more stuff and louder than ever.
Wireless color.
It tells you who's calling, so you know not to answer.
Hello. Please leave a message.
I'm sorry about that.
It's me, Dr. Hicks. I don't think I'll be able to make it tomorrow. Too much water out here.
Okay, you
I'll
be
see
careful.
later.
Okay. God bless you, Jesse. I can't.
That's brilliant.
I've been getting one with clients in my place saying, this is Joel Cordis, lawyer. We're calling to collect a debt. Finally, I got on the phone. I'm like, and they go, we're looking for this other business. I said, that's not even me. You know, but my clients are hearing this.
I think I might have turned the ringer off. But anyway, we'll worry about it later.
Oh, okay.
We'll about that, gentlemen.
Anyway,
We were talking about vowels and consonants. So.
All I meant to say was, if God had wanted the pronunciation of his name to be the most essential thing, he would not have allowed it to become, because of a lapse in usage, for it to be questionable as to what it is. So I think it's the meaning of God's name that's the most important thing. It's the eternal, ever-living God. If you like the English version, Jehovah, the God of Israel. Because sometimes when you look at the Old Testament, it's necessary to distinguish the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, from the pagan gods.
Yeah.
If Jehovah is the anglicized version of Yahweh, I noticed that in Britain there's a term that they like to use. It's by Job. Is that a way of taking God's name, using the word? Is it a shortened version of Jehovah?
Ooh.
Have you ever noticed?
No, I don't know. I never thought about that one.
You know, I hear Blake Shelton. He always comes on and says, gosh darn it. You know, dude, think about it.
Thing.
Yeah, and so I don't say geez and gosh, and I knew somebody should say, oh my word. Jesus Christ is the word of God. And you know, I'm just not taking those chances. You know? Golly gee, Jimmy Cricket. I don't play with any of that.
Yeah, when somebody says by golly, I think that's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, I don't play with any of that. I'm a little afraid of them.
I'm very much afraid of it.
Yeah, and even if we can't nail down all of those things as being right or wrong, it's good to try to avoid slang that we think is borderline.
Yeah, err on the safe side.
We do know. You go to a golf course, and what's the number one thing you hear when they slice the ball?
Yeah.
All I know is when I go to a golf course, I hear the word "for" an awful lot.
But we should be fearful of that because the Bible says that the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain.
You know, isn't that interesting? That's one of the few 10 Commandments that has an immediate penalty. Isn't that interesting, isn't it?
Yep.
God won't hold them guiltless that takes his name in vain. I mean, in vain. It is something to consider. One other thing that we wanted to mention here, like Pharaoh, he had his own gods like Ra, the sun god, the Nile, and others. And when Moses gave him the name, probably I am or Jehovah or whatever it was, Jehovah, when he gave that to Pharaoh, Pharaoh said, I don't know that God. I don't know his name. And he dismissed and disrespected the God of Israel. And you realize he was destroyed. Now, not just because he disrespected the God of Israel in his name, but also because of the hardness of his heart. But I think they all kind of go together.
The other thing was Pharaoh had all these little gods. He had a god of that, a god of that, a god, and we only have the one, and he's the god of everything, including Pharaoh. and we don't need all these little ant gods and frog gods and lice gods. And there's God the Father, the eternal, and that's the only God we need, and he can do it all. And I could see somebody who was born up and raised with all of the perversion of and sin of Egypt just really not getting it. All these sins are fun. All these little gods are fun. They're playing with toys. When you have the idols, they're adults that get to play with toys. And we showed up with a God that you can't see, and we can't tell you what he looks like, and we don't know what his voice is, and he just comes up with names like Eternal, which is absolutely true. None of us are, and that was absolutely not something that Pharaoh or apparently the rest of this world can understand.
One thing to remember, the name, not taking his God's name in vain. When you look at the various translations, it also means to carry or misuse the name. For instance, if you murder someone, or worst of all, commit genocide in the name of God, that is one of the greatest sins you can commit. And one of the reasons it's terrible is, one of the reasons that atheists and others say that they don't like religion or God, they say, look at all the people that have died in the name of religion or in the name of God. And that's true. But most of those that have been killed by other religions besides Christianity. Not all, and to be sure to say that, but non-Christians have killed in the last 18 centuries or so, like 90 million, and Christians only a few million. And by the way, the Catholic Church has not too many decades admitted that they were wrong in what they did during the what did they call the Protestant Reformation, when they were killing all those Protestants? I forgot the exact title they called it, but you all know what I mean.
Yes.
And by the way, true Christianity teaches love your enemy. Other false religions that kill the name of God do not teach love your enemy. Also, one of the things that I think catapulted human rights and Europe in general was Christianity and the Bible. It actually helped Europe.
I've had
the Protestant. I was just going to tell you the Protestant Reformation was called the Reformation.
I believe so.
Yeah, just the Reformation. Yeah.
I've had ministers tell me that they had the personality of God, and if I had a personality conflict with them, that they I was actually talking to my mother, but I was there, that they actually had a problem with Jesus Christ himself because they were a minister of God.
Very modest, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. It's the same guy challenged my 16-year-old brother to a fist fight.
Ooh, tough guy.
Stop services to do that. And I'll tell you what's funny is he was 40 or so. Well, now my brother's 50. That makes him in his 70s. Tables have turned. Let's see him do it today. That's not thinking ahead.
You won't always be young. But I believe, especially during the Protestant Reformation and the Bible got into usage more and more, I think it helped push Europe into not just human rights, but looking at science and things more objectively. That really helped catapult Western civilization. A lot of people don't know that the Bible has actually been good for the world, especially the West.
And a lot of people don't know that just using the word Christian doesn't mean that your religion is actually a Christian religion. You cannot be a Christian religion and bow down to idols. You cannot be a Christian religion and break all the commandments and worship one single man and then claim to be Christian. That's not how that works. And a lot of the world will go, they're killing Christians. ISIS is killing Christians. They may be, I don't know, but I have a feeling they're killing Catholics. And many Catholics, Jonathan Morris, they calls himself father. Theoretically, he's not anybody's father, but he was on Fox News and he said Easter was the most important time of the year for Protestants, Christians, and Catholics. So he separated Catholics from Protestant and Christian.
Yeah, I guess some do that way. I do think there is a genocide once it's all added up in the Middle East against Christians and against smaller sects like groups like the Kurds, the Houthis, and a bunch of other smaller groups, and they're being purged. And it's a horrible genocide. You know, it's funny. People will always say something like, "Well, if I had been a leader in the world during the days when Stalin was killing his 20 million or Hitler was killing his 6 or 7 million, I would have done something about it." Here is a genocide going on right now, and most of the American media tries to avoid the topic because they don't want to be politically incorrect and embarrass certain religion. I mean, that's how bad it is. And it's not that the information is unknowable. They put the stuff on the internet proudly.
Yeah, and then they'd rather cover worthless stories, absolutely worthless stories that divide us and not bring us together than to cover what's going on in the world and the genocides that are actually taking place.
I hope this last church shooting brings a community, regardless of race, together a little bit. It does seem to be, from what I'm seeing on the news. It seems like everybody's rallying around this church, and doesn't matter. And the church does not seem to have any animus, from what I can tell.
Yeah.
Well,
I was getting back. Go ahead, Gary.
just getting back, exactly is what I was going to say. Have you ever noticed? Have you noticed what Jesus taught the disciples about the name of God? When the disciples came to Jesus and asked him to teach them to pray, he said, "When you pray, say, 'Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.'" And God's name is so great that we should always hallow it when we use it. We should never use it loosely or lightly. We should always use it with reverence. And we should just stand in awe of God anyway, but we should do that where his name is concerned. And also, I think that pertains to taking oaths, even in a court of law. If they ask you to take an oath in the name of God or something like that, I would refuse to do it and explain my reasons for such. But I believe that that is probably a way of taking his name in vain.
Especially unless you see the thing, if you make a vow to God, it's in the law. If you make a vow to God, you have to keep it. God does not like people to make a vow to him or in his name and take it lightly. It's one of those penalties you read in the statute of the law. Like Christ said in the Sermon on the Mount, just answer yes, don't make a big religious thing. I imagine the Pharisees probably did it. "Oh, in the name of the eternal God of Israel, I vow to do," and they probably were lying and cheating and whatever else they were doing in God's name. And by the way, do not blaspheme God by our conduct. I'm going to look at Romans 2:21. And in this set of scriptures, Paul first starts off by criticizing mankind as a whole as being bad. And then he comes to the Jews. He says, you know the law, you're a teacher of the law, and you think that you are, a guide to the blind and all that. But then he says, I want to pick up a little context, Romans 2:21. You therefore who teach another, do not teach yourselves. You who preach that a man should not steal, do you steal? You who say do not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples of idols? You who make your boast of the law, do you dishonor God through your breaking the law? And here's the verse that I want to emphasize the most, verse 24. For the name of God, meaning he means the God of Israel, or the true God, not pagan gods. For the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. And he quotes the scripture that says the same thing. In other words, he's saying that in the city of Rome, at least a lot of Jews had a reputation of probably being con men, and we could speculate other things as well. And the pagans knew that they worshiped the one God of Israel, the true God, and that they could blaspheme God because of the conduct of these, some of the Roman Jews. And that's a message for us too.
Well, he was telling the leadership that the people in the community, their sins were on their heads as well, is the way I heard that, because of their conduct, that they were hurting the people in the community. And he was taking what they were doing and placing it upon the Sanhedrin, apparently. So he was talking to at that time. But, you know, so he doubled down on them. If they look to you for your leadership and you're doing these things, what do they see? A lot of times these people in places don't realize that everybody sees what they're doing, you know, and probably like any other community, they did.
And whatever they were doing was giving excuses to people to blaspheme God. So we as, let's say, Sabbath-keeping Christians, because that's one of the signs of God. We'll get to that commandment soon, but Sabbath-keeping Christians, if our behavior is so bad, it's going to give the God of the Sabbath a bad name, and God isn't going to be happy with us. By the way, 2 Corinthians 5:20 says we're ambassadors for Christ, and Christ said that we should be the salt of the earth. And that I think is our big challenge, to try to set a good example so the people who know that we worship the true God are, well, we're, you know, we're setting pretty good example most of the time.
That we're well spoken where his name is concerned.
Yes.
From time to time, you'll hear somebody just in passing, and they'll say, "As God is my witness," or something like that, and that just makes me tremble when I hear them say that. It's such an inappropriate use of his name, and they may have good intentions, but you just have to approach God's name like you would approach his throne if you had that ability, with awe and respect and humility, and to be one of God's people, to be on his team, you just have to do it.
You know, it's something to kind of backstep a little bit. When we're going through the Lord's Prayer, you start off by you're humbling yourself at the feet, before the throne of God. The Ten Commandments does the same thing. The Lord's Prayer kind of doubles down on the Ten Commandments. When you think the first three commandments are worship God, worship his name, have no other God before him, and then when you go to the Lord's Prayer, it starts out, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed is thy name," and then it goes into, you know, our physical needs. They kind of work side by side the way I see it. It's just an interesting duality.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Mm-hmm. And remember, respect for authority begins in the mind and the hearts, and the words we use affect it. And that's why, if people are going to respect authority, they have to start with God. Like you said, Gary, if people can say, you know, use God's name to show how sincere they are, but God, you know, if you use God's name, he expects you to really be perfect, you know, what you're going to say and do. And, you know, if people just do it as a routine thing, but they're going to fudge the truth, exaggerate the truth, you know how people are. That's being disrespectful to God, and it's dangerous spiritually.
You know, when I was little, there was the Gomer Pyle show, and he would say "golly" or however it was he said it. And my mom came in one day and she said, "You know what? He's that's using the name of God. That's what that means, godly."
Right.
And she said that's not acceptable behavior. And it really, when I realized that, because I was pretty little, it really tainted the program for me.
You know, I think we shouldn't use God's name unless we're using it in worship.
Right, or in study. You know, I read that
Yeah.
Jesus wrote about God the Father, this or this. You know, to raise His name, because it is a precious, precious name of majesty that we don't even have the right to use, other than in reverence of God. And I tell you, the word people call their pastors reverend, boy, that's just not acceptable. And father and all of that. I have some very nice people started attending church here, and they had attended 20 years ago another church that I also attended, and they the daughter, who's effectively my age, insists on, you know, I'm Mr. Overstreet, and I said, really, the people that love me call me Dave, and we're supposed to be family, so I don't need titles and things like that. Just call me Dave. Be my family. I think that's more important. I know a guy here in town. He's the Reverend Dr. Vicar. I know him personally.
How many titles does he need?
His
His name's not in there anywhere.
Actually, one guy has this title, the Most High Dr. Reverend something or other. The last part of it. Think about that. The Most High Dr. Reverend.
Somebody introduces themselves to me that way and wants to shake my hand. I'll be laughing on the ground so hard I'll be crying.
Yeah.
He invited me not to come to his Bible studies anymore because he hadn't actually read the Bible. But
yeah, I wouldn't want you around either. Say, get out of here. What are you doing coming here reading the Bible? It's coming to my Bible study. That's what I did.
He said the traditions were more important. I asked him to read 1 John 3:4, and that floored him.
Yeah.
Well, you know, in Romans 13, Paul says we are to respect all authority, starting with God and going down to the governor and really down to the police officer, their version of it, as the police officer who carries a sword not in vain. You realize that if we can teach our children to respect God, really reverence God, and respect their parents, father, mother, because father, for at least a little kid, stands kind of between God and him. Respect teachers, policemen, and judges, that kid will stay out of a lot of trouble.
Yep, that's absolutely true.
And God respects the family structure when it's done properly. I have a niece, and I don't recall, but she was sick or something, and a minister said to my father, she's not here, but I can anoint you, and hopefully through your faith, God will heal her. And he anointed my father, and I believe she healed up quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So God puts things in place. Everything has an order with him. And Einstein, before he died, he says, I look at the universe, it couldn't have happened. Somehow this was placed in order. Everything's where it's supposed to be. And that's a family structure as well, starting out with God the Father, God the Son, and the father, the head of the household, the mother, and then all of that. And Satan's trying to break every bit of that down, every bit of it.
Yeah.
By the way, you know that scripture that says that children will be their oppressors?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, as we have more fatherless kids, or at least the father's only a part-time member of the family, if we have more fatherless kids, and they don't go to church, and they're taught evolution and other garbage, so they don't believe in God's authority, they don't have a father figure, or only a part-time father, and they do not respect authority, you know what's coming, don't you? Crime and chaos. And we're seeing that in a lot of inner city, big cities where the problems are heightened. And my guess is, as this progressive liberalism spreads. And I realize that in some cases all women don't have choices, and so I'm not saying I don't understand our terrible circumstances, but women should think in terms of, if I'm going to bring a baby into the world, do I want to bring him into a world without a father? That's robbing that child of a big level of stability. They already know from prisons, in prisons, Mother's Day, tons of cards they want to make. Father's Day, who's got a father? Nobody.
Right. And
What's this Sunday?
Father's Day.
You know, I got a scripture here. It's John 17, verse 11, and it seems to indicate that you take God's name in vain, you're also taking that profanity upon yourself. And it says, Holy Father, Jesus was praying. He said, Holy Father, keep through thine own name those whom thou hast given me, that they may be as one as we are.
Good point.
I can imagine God the Father knowing what Christ has gone through for us, to have people throw his name around. How painful that must be. How maybe he's smart enough to just not look down here. I don't know, but that would have to be terribly painful to watch my son be crucified and then have people use his name like it was an old dish rag.
And just to give you an idea, on warships, where discipline is really important because we're all stuffed on this battleship together, it's a crime to show disrespect for the key officers, especially the captain. And it's true in the Army, but it's even more so in the Navy. You're all crowded together. But they have realized, I guess for many centuries now, you must treat the captain's name with respect if you want to maintain order and efficiency. And God is so much higher than a battleship captain, and his respect for him is so much greater, but it's the same principle.
If you want to learn to keep God's name the way it should be, you should read about David, because David was probably the best example of using God's name the way it ought to be used that I can think of.
Yes. True.
Garner Ted did a sermon on this exact subject. I wish I knew the name of it. I seen it a few months back. We watched it when I was down with the group down in Dayton. I just can't remember the name of the sermon, but he did one on this, and it's available obviously on a CD or maybe on the website, but I wish I could remember the name of it.
Also, though I'm sure God is understanding for people who are deceived, but if someone is a false prophet and they use God's name to gain power and influence, and they know they're a false prophet, Deuteronomy 18:20, that was a death penalty. Now, this is ancient Israel. That was a death penalty crime. Using God's name falsely to get people to follow you, God does not like that.
Yeah, for a paycheck.
Yeah.
I read a book, and a fella was in seminary school, and he left and joined the military because the kids were there learning a trade. And he said they were just partying and drinking and no different than the world, and he wanted to be there as a serious person to serve and to learn or whatever. And he said it was so bad in the seminary school that he left and joined the military. And years ago, I ran the security at a seminary school, and those kids are out of control. There was very few of them acted Christian.
Well, it's Deuteronomy 18:20 was the verse. By the way, Tyndale, the man who first put the Bible into English, he wanted to study theology. And he studied theology, I believe it was Oxford. To his shock, you could study theology at Oxford and not read the Bible, which shocked him. Now, he was a brilliant guy, could translate and all that sort of thing. So he started his own Bible study on the side while he was a theology student. But you could be a theology student and not study the Bible. Now, and I'm not saying it's that bad now, but their doctrines and ideas far overshadow the Bible, unfortunately. Well, I was thinking about next week's topic. Next week's topic is about Nehemiah, one of the heroes of the Bible. And he has this famous line that he said when they were trying to intimidate him. And his line was, should a man such as myself, and he went on to elaborate, run and hide. Now there is a great hero for you. And I was thinking about this whole thing of being salt and light. Christ implied that if you're going to be a light to the world, you can't hide your light. That means we have to learn some courage. And Nehemiah is one of those courageous Bible heroes. And then I believe the week after that we have the fourth commandment.
Yep.
Checking the schedule. So give people some idea of things to be thinking about. And see if America gets more unified because of the crime and South, or do we go the way? It's kind of be rougher on me if we go the other way, but I'm always afraid the devil is plotting and scheming ahead of us.
Well, yeah, I'm afraid that's the case, and if it plays better to the current, if it plays better to the current agenda, then they'll work with division. I mean, that's unless something miraculous happens and people override that and they're getting sick and tired of it, maybe they'll ignore that, or they'll push back against the media if it tries to play to the agenda.
By the way, Ken, would you want to encourage people to email you maybe Thursday or Friday their opinion as to whether we're going for more racial unity and harmony or more racial division? And I know everybody has to watch the media and make their opinion, but it'd be nice if 20 or 30 people were to email you what they think, Ken.
Absolutely. Email us at lineuponline2810@gmail.com, and I will forward it to everybody in the podcast for next week. And they can look it over before the fact, and kind of we can all pick it apart and discuss it. But yeah, lineuponline2810@gmail.com. Just go ahead and send anything you like, and like I said, we'll look it over. And we'll pay attention to the news this week and see what the theme becomes because of this tragic incident where this obvious sick individual decided this was something he wanted to do. So yeah, and there's all kinds of aspects from the psychotropic drugs to what we don't know much about this young man, but he just, something in his life has destroyed his mind, whether he was possessed or the drugs did it, or his upbringing. Something destroyed him, and he in turn destroyed 9 other people.
I'm almost afraid to say this, but I'll say it anyway. And if I'm wrong, you all can certainly tell me. I look at the media coverage of stuff, and I just think it's making racial fears greater. And I look at, when I was we happened to be in St. Louis near the airport. We were flying out that day. The Ferguson verdict came down, and we're at Natalie's uncle's house in another suburb of St. Louis, an hour or two before that. It appeared to me the national media and the St. Louis media were almost firing up the people to say, if you don't get what you want, you are justified to loot and burn. And anarchists from, I guess, even as far away as California, New York, were all there in St. Louis ready to pounce.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
The media and the thugs, and there are always plenty of thugs in cities who ran wild after that, that's only going to make, as a black person especially, it's only going to make racism worse. And I'm saying,
yep.
Does anybody have any, this is me saying it to my wife, anybody in the media around you have any sense at all?
No, because no, they obviously, yeah, it's no, because if they can advance their narrative doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that and all the little groups are doing it. The communists show up. The Communist Party shows up to these things. They show up to these events and hand out leaflets. They hope there's a bunch of people there. They show everybody that has a little bit of an agenda or something they want to force down people's throat, show up to these things and push these things and antagonize the people to stir this pot. And it's until we get sick of it and the media doesn't, or until the media maybe shines a light on this mess. And,
it seems that what matters to the media, what matters to the media is drawing the largest possible audience.
Oh yeah, everything is marketing.
Even if they have to stir up a hornet's nest.
Exactly.
Blood is on their hands. The blood is on their hands.
They'll emphasize whatever they need to emphasize to turn it into the biggest audience gather that they possibly can. And
then they'll play pilot. Yeah, then they'll play pilot and wash their hands.
And then if you had been in St. Louis that night, the evening building up to the verdict, you wouldn't have believed the media coverage. I was saying, we were switching several channels now. We weren't on conservative channels, just liberal ones, but they're the majority in St. Louis. I'm thinking, what is wrong with these people?
Yeah. In some of these large cities, you can't even find a conservative channel.
And I had to say
I travel a lot, so I see it.
Guys, it's time for us to sign off.
But I guess we better leave before we upset people.
If it's not,
I don't think we're going to upset them. They have a choice. They have a mouse,
It may be too late for that.
Yeah, well, actually, we're doing just
justify evil people. But seeing all these people rioting, it's just going to stir up more hatred. That's what I was trying to say in my awkward way.
Yeah, and in my lifetime, from what I've seen, the country's never been more divided than it is now. But anyway, we'll sit there and we'll say good night, I guess. And don't forget, email us with your opinions on what took place the other night and what you think may come of it, and we'll share it next week. So
we want love
until
and
then,
harmony, but we may not.
That's right. You got it.
We're happy you could make it. So glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.
Let's turn the thing down.
Good night, everybody. Have a wonderful Sabbath.
Good night.
Good night, Ken.